The private tasting suite of the Al Qasr Marina Tower was designed to intimidate. Muted gold walls, frosted glass panels, a single obsidian table large enough for a board meeting, though only 2 men occupied it, Sheikh Rashid Al-Hafid and his lead advisor, Karim. Both waited for the final signature on a cultural heritage acquisition worth $240 million, a handwritten 12th century manuscript said to contain the earliest codified maritime laws of the Gulf. Outside that room, she moved silently. Lena. Apron, tray, neutral posture. The hotel had assigned her as the temporary attendant after a staffing reshuffle, though no one really looked at her closely enough to notice the quiet precision with which she placed the crystal water glasses, or the way her eyes flickered, just once, toward the sealed leather portfolio resting on the table. To them, she was furniture, a background utility. The sheikh, bored between negotiations, glanced at her without lifting his chin. Then, switching to a clipped Gulf dialect, he asked a question that made Karim's mouth twitch. An intentionally difficult, archaic phrase about obedience and service. A test. A humiliation dressed as curiosity. Lena froze for half a second, then she answered, not in the dialect, but in flawless, resonant, classical Arabic, the kind reserved for scholars, jurists, and imams who had trained their entire lives. Her tone precise, her syntax immaculate, her cadence unmistakably authoritative. The room stopped breathing. The sheikh's fingers slipped from the pen. Karim blinked as if the lighting had changed. The silence carried the weight of something irreversible, though neither man understood why it unsettled them so deeply. Sometimes the smallest voice reveals the mistake everyone else is making. He stared at her, walking away, unable to understand how he'd missed someone like her. The suite's door clicked shut behind her, but the tension she left behind spread like a cold draft across the obsidian table. Sheikh Rashid sat forward, elbows resting on the polished surface, eyes narrowing, not with anger, but with the disorientation of a man whose world had shifted half a degree off its axis. "Find out who she is," he murmured to Karim. But Lena, already halfway down the corridor, didn't hear him. She was focused on keeping her breathing steady. This was the danger of speaking too well, of revealing too much. She had spent years mastering invisibility, learning when to nod, when to feign confusion, when to reduce herself into the quiet shape people expected. Today she had slipped. She reached the service alcove, placed the tray down gently, and gripped its edge until her hands steadied. The hotel's uniform code forbade jewelry, but beneath her collarbone, she felt the familiar weight of the small silver pendant she always wore. A reminder of a life she should have had, the one she'd trained for before visas, debt, and loss forced her into the edges of other people's worlds. She had once been a doctoral candidate in classical philology. Now she refilled water glasses. Lena exhaled carefully. It didn't matter, she told herself. She had answered the sheikh because the sentence he spoke, intentionally archaic and condescending, invoked a proverb her grandmother used to whisper while grading her homework. She wasn't defending herself. She was defending the language she loved. But still, she should have held her tongue. A soft chime sounded. Her supervisor's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Lena, the sheikh has requested that you remain assigned to that suite. No rotation." Her stomach sank. She'd wanted to disappear back into the afternoon shift, where guests didn't look at her twice. Instead, she was being pulled back into a room where 2 powerful men now viewed her as a curiosity. Or worse, as someone who had embarrassed them. She returned slowly, adjusting her posture to appear smaller. The handle was cool beneath her fingers as she pushed the door open. The sheikh watched her enter with the assessing eyes of a man accustomed to reading markets, contracts, men. Not women like her, quiet, educated, and inconvenient. Karim gave her a thin smile, the kind someone offers right before a trap is sprung. We didn't know the hotel employed staff with such linguistic refinement, Karim said. His dialect was polished, formal, his tone attempting courtesy but failing to hide irritation. Lena kept her gaze lowered. I apologize if my response was inappropriate. Inappropriate, the sheikh repeated softly. No. Unexpected. He gestured toward the leather portfolio containing the manuscript contract. Since you understand classical Arabic, perhaps you may stay. It seems we underestimate people today. Lena felt a faint pressure in her chest, the early tremor of danger. Not all visibility is a gift. Lena stepped back into her place by the wall, hands folded neatly, posture neutral. The men forgot about her again, or pretended to, yet the air carried a new kind of attention, a watchfulness, as if her presence now shifted the room's gravitational center. Karim resumed speaking with the impeccably dressed broker, seated across from them, a man named Davison who specialized in heritage acquisitions. His suit had the stiffness of someone who wanted to communicate seriousness without having earned it. He tapped a thick finger against the leather portfolio. As I explained, Davison said, this document formalizes your exclusive ownership of the manuscript. Provenance is impeccable. Condition remarkable. You're acquiring the crown jewel of pre-modern maritime law. The sheikh leaned back, but Lena noticed something most others would have missed. The way his gaze flicked to the portfolio with a hunger that bordered on vulnerability. Men like him rarely revealed desire. It was a weakness, an aperture through which rivals could strike. But this manuscript touched something deeper: lineage, cultural pride, the legacy he wished to craft. Karim added, we've had 3 experts verify the authenticity. Every one of them confirmed the script, ink, and binding match the era. Lena said nothing, though the claim echoed uncomfortably inside her mind. Matching an era was not the same as belonging to it. She kept her hands behind her back to hide the subtle tightening of her fingers. If she were still at the university, she'd have asked to see spectral analyses, ink composition reports, ultraviolet patterns on the margins, anything that could reveal whether the manuscript was genuine or a masterful forgery. But she was no expert here. She was a waitress in a black apron. Davison slid a small velvet box toward the sheikh. Inside is your ceremonial signing pen. Iron nib, custom carved, modeled after the period scribes who wrote the original text. A symbolic gesture. The irony twisted something in her stomach. Using a reproduction pen to sign papers for a potentially reproduced manuscript. The sheikh's voice softened. We sign tonight. Lena kept her breathing even. Her supervisor would fire her if she interfered. She had no legal authority, no academic standing, no voice that mattered. If she was wrong, she would lose the fragile stability she'd rebuilt. Late-night shifts, 2 shared apartments, the constant fear of visa expiration. She should stay silent, and yet, each time she glanced at the portfolio, a quiet pulse of dread throbbed behind her ribs. Something about the leather binding's edge, its modern stitching perhaps, felt inconsistent with what a 12th century archival housing should look like. She wasn't sure. But uncertainty had a sound, a faint, wrong note. The sheikh reopened the portfolio, revealing neatly arranged pages inside protective sleeves. Her pulse quickened. People assume danger arrives loudly. Often it enters the room without making a single sound. The moment the sheikh lifted the first protective sleeve, Lena felt the shift. Not in the room's temperature, nor in anyone's expression, but in the stillness inside her body. A subtle internal recoil, like muscle memory triggered by the sight of handwriting she did not yet understand, but instinctively mistrusted. She had spent 7 years studying pre-modern scripts. Her eyes recognized patterns faster than her mind could articulate them. It was similar to hearing a familiar melody played slightly off-key. Anyone could appreciate the tune, but only a musician sensed the wrongness. From her place by the wall, she watched. Davison launched into a rehearsed explanation. As you can see, the manuscript was preserved remarkably well, minimal water damage, margins intact. The ink remains legible with only minor oxidation, a testament to the original scribe's craftsmanship. Karim nodded approvingly. The sheikh leaned forward, captivated. Lena's gaze narrowed. Something about the ink's tone bothered her. It was too even. No scribe from that era produced such uniformity over long passages. Natural ink darkened, lightened, fractured from pressure changes. Yet here, every stroke looked consistent, as if produced from a batch mixed in a single afternoon. Davison turned a page. Note the vertical elongation of the letter forms, typical of the late Abbasid coastal tradition. He wasn't wrong. But he wasn't right either. Lena saw it. The elongation existed, yes, but the curvature at the base of several letters belonged to a later period. A hybridization that made no historical sense. Something a modern forger, with a decent education and a dangerous amount of confidence, might create. But Davison spoke with absolute assurance, and that confidence, she realized, was part of the trap. Arrogant certainty is persuasive, especially when it flatters power. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak. She wanted to ask questions. But the room was not hers. Then the sheikh shifted, sensing perhaps a faint unease. "Karim, bring it closer." Karim placed the manuscript directly before him. The sheikh's eyes glimmered with pride and desperation. A man who wanted to be the patron of a rediscovered legal treasure. A man who needed this to be real. Lena swallowed, forcing herself to remain composed. Her supervisor's voice echoed from earlier. "Do not interrupt VIP negotiations." Her own fear whispered, "You cannot afford to lose another job." Her conscience countered, "He is about to make a mistake worth more than everything you have ever earned." Davison continued confidently, "3 external experts authenticated it. You are safe to proceed." Safe. The word burned. The sheikh raised the ceremonial pen, examining its carved nib. The contract lay just inches away. Lena pressed her fingertips together behind her back, steadying herself. Silence gives predators room to work. Lena stood perfectly straight, but her mind was spiraling through layers of script, ink, and historical context, like a silent machine revving beneath her ribs. She tried, truly tried, to convince herself she might be wrong. That the ink's impossible consistency was a trick of the suite's warm lighting. That the hybrid letter forms were a rare transitional style. That the stitching she noticed earlier was simply the result of later conservation work. But denial buckled quickly under experience. She had spent countless nights in the university archives, fingers trembling over vellum older than entire empires. She knew the tiny hesitations in authentic handwriting, the pauses where the scribe dipped his pen, the faint tremors from uneven parchment, the pressure shifts caused by fatigue or humidity. Authenticity had texture, imperfection, humanity. This manuscript had none. Davison mistook her stillness for obedience. He continued, "Our experts found the watermark on the inner folios consistent with what was expected from that period." Lena's breath caught. Watermark. A 12th century manuscript on vellum would not have a watermark. Watermarks appeared with later paper manufacturing, centuries afterward. Maybe Davison misspoke. Or maybe he didn't understand the forensic implication of what he'd just said. Karim didn't catch it. The sheikh didn't catch it. Lena felt her pulse in her wrists. Davison moved on smoothly, flipping to the manuscript's opening page. "This, Your Excellency, is the dedication line, a blessing recorded by the original jurist. Note the phrasing. unmistakably aligned with the era's maritime legal tradition. Lena's eyes tightened. The phrase was close, but the syntax belonged to an author writing with knowledge of that tradition, not from within it. It was like reading a modern scholar imitating ancient speech, perfect in theory, hollow in life. Every detail compounded her dread. An uneven ink profile she did not see, a vellum texture too consistent, a binding thread that reflected light incorrectly, synthetic fiber, maybe nylon, and that absurd mention of a watermark. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth to silence the words rising uninvited. Her life had fallen apart once because she had spoken too boldly, criticizing a senior professor's authentication work. It had cost her funding, reputation, the visa extension that would have secured her future. She never forgot the coldness in the administrator's voice. "Perhaps you should learn your place." So she learned. She hid. She adapted. Now, as Davison angled the contract toward the sheikh, Lena felt that old fear coil inside her, alongside something sharper. Anger, perhaps, or responsibility. She thought of her grandmother's voice correcting her Arabic homework with gentle precision. "Truth isn't loud," she used to say. "It's exact." The pen was uncapped. The sheikh's hand hovered above the signature line. Sometimes disaster looks like progress until the last possible second. The pen hovered just long enough for Lena to feel the unbearable pressure of inevitability. The sheikh inhaled, steady and assured, the kind of breath taken by a man accustomed to sealing multi-million-dollar deals with unshakable confidence. Karim leaned back slightly, satisfied. Davison smiled, the polished smile of someone who believed the game was already won. Lena's entire being contracted. She watched the pen's shadow glide across the page, long and elegant under the suite's amber lighting. The ceremonial nib reflected a narrow glint, a thin, decisive line of light resembling the blade of a trap about to spring shut. Her heart pounded harder. The watermark, the synthetic fiber, the hybrid script, the uniform ink, all the pieces screamed a single, terrible conclusion. But she also remembered what happened the last time she challenged a man in power. The patronizing tilt of the professor's head, the administrative meeting where she was gently but firmly pushed off the academic ladder she had climbed since childhood, the immigration interview where she realized no one cared about the truth of her allegations, only their inconvenience. She had survived by disappearing, by lowering her gaze, by swallowing brilliance until it tasted like ash. And yet now, staring at a fraud wrapped in prestige, she felt something piercing through the fear, a quiet certainty, small but unyielding. The truth was shifting inside her like a locked door beginning to give way. Davison gestured confidently. "Your Excellency, if you'll sign here, the manuscript becomes exclusively yours, protected under international heritage law. This is the safest acquisition you will ever make." Lena's stomach twisted. Safest. If he signed, he wouldn't just lose the money. He would sign a document embedding his name into a chain of fraudulent provenance. The reputational fallout could bury him. And because the contract referenced authenticity explicitly, he could be accused of knowingly participating in the circulation of a fabricated artifact. He wasn't buying a treasure. He was walking into a legal minefield. Her palms grew damp. She wiped them subtly against her apron. Her breathing thinned into small, fragile threads. Karim glanced in her direction then, as though checking whether she was paying attention, almost daring her to challenge them again. His smirk was soft, dismissive, the kind used on people who were allowed to be present but never relevant. The sheikh lowered the pen tip toward the paper. A faint ringing filled Lena's ears, the kind that came when silence grew too tight, too heavy, too dangerous. Her throat constricted. Her vision tunneled slightly toward the contract. One signature, One stroke, and his fate would seal. She closed her eyes for a single heartbeat, steadying herself. If she stayed silent, she remained safe. If she spoke, everything she'd built to survive could collapse, but some truths refuse to be buried. Even the quietest person reaches a moment when silence becomes unbearable. Lena reopened her eyes just as the pen touched the paper, a soft whisper of metal against contract. Barely a sound, yet it detonated inside her chest. The room around her sharpened, the faint hum of the air filtration system, the slow sway of the ceiling light, the subtle rustle of Davison adjusting his cufflinks. Every detail felt hyper-real, as if the world itself were urging her to act. But she didn't move. Not yet. She watched the ink bead at the tip of the nib. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, syncing with the seconds slipping away. She knew the structure of deception intimately. Forgery had a rhythm, and this one was in its final movement. Once the sheikh signed, Davison's confidence would crystallize into impunity. The fraudulent manuscript would be legitimized by the buyer's reputation. Undoing the damage later would be nearly impossible. Her fingers curled tightly behind her back. The sheikh paused, not because he sensed danger, but because Karim leaned in to clarify a final detail regarding shipment and insurance. They spoke in low, controlled tones, the clipped cadence of men who believed every variable had been mastered. Lena, staring at the manuscript's open page, caught another inconsistency: the folio number. It was written in a style from a century later, a subtle flourish only a trained paleographer would notice. A tiny curve, too modern, a detail no authentic 12th century scribe would have used. Her breath hitched. She wasn't imagining it. The script was a composite of eras that did not coexist. The forger had knowledge, but not mastery. They imitated history rather than inhabiting it. Davison cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, if there are no further questions, I invite His Excellency to finalize the acquisition." Lena realized something even more alarming. The contract itself contained an authenticity clause phrased in dangerously broad language. If the manuscript was ever challenged, the financial liability would fall entirely on the buyer, meaning the sheikh, meaning the loss would be legally irreversible. If he signed, the trap would snap shut. The muscles along her spine tightened. She felt her grandmother's voice echo through memory, gentle yet unyielding. Precision is not pride, it is duty. Her throat grew dry. She forced herself to swallow, the motion stiff and audible to her own ears. Karim glanced at her again, this time with a slight frown. He sensed something. A shift, a tension. The sheikh repositioned the contract. This was her last moment before the truth became too late. Her chest tightened with something sharper than fear. Clarity. She was done shrinking. She inhaled once, steady and deep, the kind of breath she hadn't allowed herself to take in years. Her eyes lifted from the manuscript to the sheikh's poised hand. A decision crystallized. People think courage is loud. Often it begins in complete silence. The first anomaly surfaces clearly. Lena stepped forward before she consciously decided to. It was a subtle movement, barely a shift of weight, but in a room built on hierarchy, it sounded like thunder. Karim's head snapped toward her. Davison's smile thinned. The sheikh's pen froze millimeters above the contract. "Is there a problem?" Karim asked. His tone softened with that patronizing sweetness men use when they believe they still control the room. Lena didn't answer him. She couldn't. Every word she might have formed dissolved into the sound of her own heartbeat. Fear pressed against her ribs, urging retreat. But the manuscript lay open in front of the sheikh. And she saw it clearly now. The folio number, written in a slightly slanted hand, its tail curved downward in a style she recognized instantly. It wasn't just anachronistic, It was specific, a style taught at a French conservatory program for modern manuscript reproduction, a program she knew because she once applied for its scholarship and was rejected. The flourished numeral was practically a signature of that training. Her stomach dropped. That tiny flick of ink, that single curve, was the first irrefutable anomaly. The first forensic crack in the facade. No medieval scribe could have made that shape. It was like seeing a modern wristwatch in a Renaissance portrait, subtle to the untrained eye, catastrophic to an expert. Her voice arrived before her courage did. "Your Excellency," she said softly. The Sheikh's eyes lifted, measured, curious, not yet hostile. "Yes?" Karim bristled. She was not asked to speak. Lena's palms were damp. She clasped them behind her back to hide the tremor. "You may want to examine the folio number on this page," she said. "It does not correspond to the numbering style of the era." Davison laughed, a short, brittle sound. Folio numbering conventions varied wildly. It's hardly grounds for concern. But his eyes flickered, a tiny, reluctant flinch. The Sheikh noticed it. Lena continued, her voice steadier now, though her heart raced. "This number uses a curvature introduced centuries later. It is consistent with modern replication schools, not medieval scribes." Davison scoffed louder than necessary. "With respect, she's a waitress." The Sheikh lifted a hand, silencing him. "What do you mean?" he asked Lena directly. Her breath tightened. This was the line she had avoided crossing for years, the line where competence became threat. But she couldn't retreat now. The truth had already entered the air. She leaned slightly closer, pointing not at the manuscript, but at an angle where he could see it without her touching anything. A scribe from the 12th century would have written numbers with a firmer baseline. This one has a downward hook, an affectation from contemporary training. It is impossible for this to be original. The Sheikh stared at the mark. His brows drew together slowly, thoughtfully. Karim's jaw tensed. Davison's composure began to fracture. The room's balance shifted, not dramatically, not yet, but enough to feel it. Enough to know the first thread had been pulled. Truth begins as a hairline crack, long before anyone hears it break. She interrupts the signing. The Sheikh's pen hovered again. This time not with confidence, but with uncertainty. A thin, invisible fissure ran through the atmosphere of the room. Davison sensed it instantly. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, elbows planted, smile sharpened like a blade disguised as courtesy. "Your Excellency," he said carefully, "minor stylistic deviations are common. The young woman is enthusiastic." A pause. "Not qualified." Lena's pulse hammered, but something had already shifted inside her. She had crossed the threshold. Silence was no longer an option. It would now be complicity. The Sheikh's eyes remained fixed on the folio number. "Why did none of our experts mention this?" Davison replied smoothly. "Because it is insignificant." Insignificant. The word hit Lena harder than the mockery earlier. It was the exact dismissal she had heard in academic boardrooms, men waving away anomalies they didn't understand. She stepped closer. "Your Excellency," she said quietly. "May I show you something else?" Karim snapped, "No, you may not." But the Sheikh raised a hand again, his gaze never leaving Lena. "Let her speak." Karim stiffened. Davison's jaw twitched. The entire dynamic of the room shifted by a single degree, but that degree was seismic. Lena inhaled. She felt every consequence lined up like dominoes, ready to fall. Her job, her visa, her anonymity, all of it hung on the next sentence. She pointed gently, never touching the vellum, to a section near the margin. There is a conflict between the ink's age profile and the pen pressure. Medieval scribes used quills with inconsistent flow, so their lines vary microscopically. Here, she leaned just enough for the sheikh to see. The ink distribution is perfect, too perfect, consistent across every stroke. That only happens with modern iron gall formulations stabilized with synthetic binders. Davison cut in sharply. You are speaking far beyond your authority. But the sheikh didn't look away from the manuscript. A crease had formed across his brow, the kind that meant he was recalculating an entire worldview. Lena continued, her voice low but unwavering. What you're about to sign is not a purchase agreement. It is a liability trap. If challenged, the clause in Section 4.2 transfers the burden of proof onto you. It means that if the manuscript is exposed as a forgery, the loss becomes yours, entirely. You would be responsible for proving authenticity retroactively, which is legally impossible. For the first time, true fear flickered in Karim's eyes. Davison's face drained of color. The sheikh's hand withdrew from the contract as though the paper had turned hot. Slowly, he capped the ceremonial pen. Why? He murmured, voice icy. Would a legitimate acquisition require such a clause? Davison stammered, because this ensures clarity. But the sheikh cut him off, turning fully toward Lena. His stare held weight, heavy, assessing, no longer dismissive. You, he said. Explain. Lena felt the world narrow to a single fragile point. Everything she had run from was now staring directly at her. When truth finally demands to be spoken, there is no safe place left to stand. Full, technical dismantling. For the first time since she entered the suite, Lena allowed herself to breathe, not in relief, but in preparation. The sheikh's attention was fully on her now, sharp and unblinking, the gaze of a man who had built an empire by knowing exactly when he was being deceived. She stepped closer to the table, careful, measured, every motion deliberate. She didn't touch the manuscript. She didn't need to. Your Excellency, she began, there are 3 independent indicators that this manuscript is not from the 12th century. You've already seen the first, the folio number written in a modern reproduction style. The second is here. She gestured toward a faint discoloration near the inner margin. Authentic vellum reacts to humidity with microscopic warping, she explained. It stretches unevenly, but this sheet shows a uniform tension, as if the entire surface was treated with a stabilizing agent. That technique didn't exist until the late 20th century, and even then, only in conservation labs. Karim frowned deeply. You're saying it was artificially aged? No, Lena replied. I'm saying it was protected, before anyone ever used it to write, which is impossible for a medieval document. Treated vellum is modern. Every museum conservator knows this. Davison shifted, his facade cracking at the edges. This is absurd. You cannot possibly detect that with the naked eye. Lena met his gaze, her voice turning colder, sharper. I was trained to. A silence fell, not the awkward kind, but the kind that precedes collapse. The sheikh leaned forward, eyes narrowing with intellectual hunger. And the third indicator? He asked. Lena hesitated only a second. The ink! Davison flinched. She continued. Iron gall ink from the 12th century oxidizes irregularly. Over centuries, it produces a crystalline edge around heavy strokes. Look here. She angled herself so the sheikh could see the page. These lines are smooth. Too smooth. Perfect flow. Perfect thickness. Identical density. That can only happen with modern binders designed to prevent feathering. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. If this manuscript were truly from that era, the ink would have migrated into the vellum fibers. But in several places, especially at the top margin, the ink sits on top of the surface, a clear sign of recent application. The sheikh's expression hardened. Davison's breath turned uneven. Karim whispered, "This cannot be." Lena softly delivered the final cut. An artifact like this, if authentic, would show centuries of handling. Abrasion at page corners, deposition of environmental dust, natural discoloration along the spine. Instead, what we see is immaculate. It's a masterpiece, yes, but a modern one. A controlled creation, likely by someone with training, but not time, not history. Davison finally broke. "You don't know what you're implying." Lena turned her gaze to him. "I know exactly what I'm implying." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The manuscript is not just forged. It is strategically forged, with enough scholarly sophistication to convince evaluators who didn't look closely. Someone counted on the buyer signing quickly. Someone counted on power to overlook precision. The sheikh exhaled once, slow, dangerous. A single truth can dismantle what arrogance spent years constructing. The hidden legal trap is revealed. The sheikh leaned back slowly, his hands folded, his expression unreadable in the dim amber light. He wasn't angry yet. That was what frightened Davison most. Anger was predictable. This silence was analysis. "Show me the clause," the sheikh said. Karim fumbled through the contract pages until he reached section 4.2, the very paragraph Lena had referenced. His eyes scanned it quickly, but comprehension didn't immediately register. It looked innocuous. A few lines dense with formal language, the sort men sign without a second thought. Lena stepped closer, careful to maintain the deference expected in such a room. "May I?" The sheikh nodded. She didn't touch the manuscript or the contract. Instead, she pointed at a line halfway down the page. "This passage," she said softly, "reverses the burden of proof." Karim blinked. "Meaning?" "In the event of a challenge to authenticity," Lena explained, "the responsibility to prove the manuscript is genuine falls on you, the buyer, not the seller." The sheikh's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Lena continued, voice steady. "That is the opposite of standard protocol in heritage acquisitions. Normally, the seller must prove authenticity. But this clause subtly shifts that burden." She paused, then added the part that made Davison visibly pale. "It means that even if the manuscript is proven fake, you would still lose." Karim inhaled sharply. "What?" Davison tried desperately to intervene. "This clause is standard." "It is not," Lena said. Still calm, still precise. She pointed to the next sentence. "This line states that any future disputes must be settled in the seller's jurisdiction. That jurisdiction does not recognize independent forensic examination reports unless both parties agree in writing." She waited. "And that agreement," she added, "can be withheld without explanation." The sheikh stared at the contract as if it had begun to rot in his hands. Lena delivered the final blow. "If you sign this document, you are legally binding yourself to accept this manuscript as authentic, regardless of future evidence. You would have no recourse, no refunds, no claims, no arbitration." Karim's face drained of color. He looked at Davison as though seeing him clearly for the first time. Davison tried to recover. "Your Excellency, these hypotheticals are exaggerated. The experts confirmed—" "Which experts?" Lena asked quietly. Davison froze. She continued. "You named no institutions, provided no credentials. You presented no spectral analyses, no pigment reports, no fiber breakdowns. Only verbal assurances. Because real experts would have seen what you hoped the buyer wouldn't." The sheikh turned his gaze to Davison, slowly, deliberately. A gaze sharpened by betrayal. Davison's breath hitched. Lena stepped back, giving the truth space to settle. "The manuscript is forged," she said softly, "and the contract ensures you carry the punishment for believing the lie." A silence fell so heavy it felt architectural, thick, structural, immovable. Sometimes the most dangerous traps are written in beautiful language. The scheme begins to collapse. Davison's composure unraveled in minutes. Sweat formed along his temples, shining under the suite's warm lighting. His shoulders tightened, his breath thinning into shallow bursts. Yet he attempted one final defense. People always did when they sensed their empire tilting beneath them. "Your Excellency," he began, voice trembling beneath forced steadiness. "This is a misunderstanding. She is misinterpreting." "She has not misinterpreted anything," the sheikh said, each word measured like a gavel strike. Davison froze. Karim's gaze flicked between them, searching for a diplomatic lifeline. But none existed. His earlier arrogance collapsed into a grim realization. The girl he'd dismissed had just detonated the entire negotiation with a handful of observations no expert had dared to voice. Or perhaps no true expert had ever been consulted. Lena stepped back, posture controlled, trying to disappear again out of habit. But she couldn't. Not this time. All eyes were on her, the weight of the room shifted in her direction, and for once, she didn't shrink. The sheikh tapped the manuscript lightly with one finger. "I want your answer," he said to Davison, "and I want the truth." Davison swallowed, hard. "I cannot comment on the deeper provenance without contacting. You will comment now." The tone permitted no escape. Davison's lips trembled. It was subtle, but Lena saw it. The same micro-reaction of guilt she used to analyze in her academic seminars, back before her life had been dismantled. She saw denial forming, then dying, then trying to resurrect itself in the form of excuses. "I relied on my partner's findings," Davison said weakly. "He assured me." "Name him," Karim demanded. But Davison didn't, because he couldn't. The sheikh leaned forward. "You attempted to sell me an unverified artifact, using a contract designed to protect only yourself. And this young woman," he pointed briefly toward Lena, "proved in minutes what you failed to prove in months." Davison collapsed back into his chair, the structure of his lie buckling with him. Lena felt the tremor of adrenaline spreading across her hands. She clasped them again to steady herself. She was part of this collapse now, irreversibly. Karim's voice was quiet steel. "You engineered a transaction that would trap His Excellency into inheriting criminal liability." Davison's eyes widened in panic. No, I never—" But Lena cut him off gently, her voice almost sorrowful. "The contract's language is intentional. Every clause designed to ensure he cannot challenge the authenticity. Whoever drafted it understood exactly what would happen once the manuscript was exposed." The sheikh nodded slowly. "He would be named as the final source of the forgery. And appear complicit," Lena added, tone soft but devastating. "Even though he was only the victim." Davison's silence confirmed everything. In the quiet that followed, the scheme died. When deception collapses, it always leaves one sound behind, truth settling into the space it was denied. Exposure becomes inevitable. Davison's breathing turned ragged, each inhale a tiny defeat. The polished confidence he had worn like armor was gone. Now he looked smaller, corners collapsing inward, as though the truth had siphoned the air out of him. Karim stood beside the sheikh, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. The quiet hum of the suite seemed louder, an ambient witness to Davison's unraveling. Lena remained by the table's edge, still as a lit candle. She knew this moment too well. The instant where a lie realized it had nowhere left to run. The sheikh's voice was deceptively calm. "You have one chance to explain the origin of this manuscript." Davison's fingers trembled against the table. I was told the provenance was reliable. My associate, he handled the verification." You said earlier there were 3 independent experts, Kareem snapped. Where are their reports? Davison's throat tightened. He looked down, unable to meet their eyes. There are summaries. Summaries, Lena repeated softly. Not analyses. Davison flinched at the way she said it, like a scholar reciting a verdict. She stepped forward slightly, speaking not to Davison, but to the Sheikh. Your Excellency, no legitimate expert would authenticate a manuscript of this value without providing a full technical dossier. Ink composition, vellum fiber analysis, spectral imaging, provenance chain, handling timeline. At least 50 pages of supporting material. Anything less is negligence. Kareem watched her with a dawning respect that startled even him. Davison's voice cracked. Look, my associate had access to a private atelier. They specialize in restorations. He said the manuscript was delicate, that removing it for extensive tests could damage. The only thing that's delicate, Lena interrupted, is your story. Davison snapped toward her, not in anger, but in desperation. You don't understand how these acquisitions work. Lena held his gaze, unblinking. I understand exactly how forgeries work. The suite went quiet. The Sheikh pressed 2 fingers together, a contemplative gesture that carried far more danger than raised voices ever could. So this manuscript never had a verified chain of custody. It had a partial one, Davison whispered. Meaning fabricated, Kareem said. Meaning constructed from fragments, Lena thought. She'd seen it before. Real names mixed with false transfer notes, archival stamps digitally recreated, legitimate history blended with carefully placed lies. The most convincing forgeries were not entirely invented. They were anchored in just enough truth to feel safe. Lena spoke softly, almost reluctantly. The binding thread is modern. The ink is modern. The folio numbering is modern. If there was ever an authentic core, it was dismantled and replaced piece by piece. Whoever created this wanted you to believe it had survived miraculously intact. The Sheikh stared at the manuscript, his expression darkening not with rage, but with something heavier, violation. Betrayal carries a colder temperature than anger. Davison's final defense collapsed in a whisper. I didn't know. The Sheikh leaned in, his voice low enough to tremble the air. Ignorance is not an excuse when you attempt to steal $240 million from me. Lena felt her pulse slow, not in calm, but in certainty. Nothing terrifies the guilty more than the moment the truth gains gravity. The collapse accelerates. Davison looked like he was dissolving inside his own suit. His collar seemed too tight, his breath too short, his polished exterior shrinking under the weight of exposure. The suite's warm lighting, once flattering, now sharpened every line of fear across his face. Kareem stepped closer, looming in quiet judgment. You came here to steal from him, he said. That is the only explanation. Davison shook his head vigorously. I was deceived as well. I am a middleman. My associate procured the manuscript. He set the terms. Then name him, the Sheikh said. A beat of silence. Davison opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flicked downward. Fear, not defiance. Whoever his associate was, Davison feared him more than he feared the billionaire sitting 2 meters away. Lena watched the exchange with a stillness that came from years of training herself not to attract danger. But now, ironically, she was the most dangerous person in the room. Not because she threatened anyone, but because she had revealed the truth, and the truth had its own momentum. The Sheikh turned to her again. If I had signed this contract, what would have happened? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was intimate, spoken like a man confronting the ghost of a disaster narrowly avoided. Lena inhaled gently. You would have been bound to the manuscript's authenticity. When experts inevitably challenged it, the seller would refuse cooperation. You'd have no legal grounds to return it. And because the contract listed you as the final owner pre-authentication, the fraud would be traced to your possession. Karim stiffened. He would be liable. Yes, Lena said. Not legally responsible for the forgery itself, but legally responsible for circulating a falsified artifact, even unintentionally. The Sheikh's expression hardened. My reputation would have carried the stain. Lena nodded once, and the financial loss would likely exceed the purchase value. Davison let out a faint, broken noise, as if hearing the scheme described aloud finally shattered what remained of his denials. The Sheikh exhaled slowly, his voice deepening. You were willing to risk ruining me. Davison collapsed into stammering apologies, weak, scattered phrases without structure or conviction. He looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands. Karim stepped away from him in disgust. Lena noticed something subtle in the Sheikh's posture now. Not rage, not humiliation, but disappointment. The kind that sits low in the chest, heavier than fury. He turned to her again, studying her with a recalibrated gaze. How, he asked softly, did you see all of this? The numbering, the ink, the contract's intent. How did you know where to look? Lena felt her breath catch. No one had asked her that since she lost her academic life, since she disappeared. For a moment, she wanted to shrink again, to hide. But she didn't. Her voice came out steady, quiet, but no longer apologetic. Because someone once taught me that precision saves people who don't know they need saving. Hey, the Sheikh held her gaze and for the first time truly saw her. The truth humbles everyone, even those who believed they were untouchable. Consequences ignite around her. The silence that filled the suite now was no longer hostile. It was contemplative, sharpened, waiting. Davison sat slumped in his chair, his pulse visibly pounding at his neck. Karim stood rigid, every muscle set like stone. And the Sheikh, he regarded the manuscript as though it were a venomous creature disguised in silk. Karim, the Sheikh said quietly, secure the portfolio. Even that simple command made Davison flinch. Karim closed the leather case with deliberate care, sealing the forged manuscript inside. The sound of the metal clasp locking was final, almost ceremonial, the closing of a grave. The Sheikh turned his attention to Davison, who looked as if the room itself were contracting around him. You will explain your associate's role in this, the Sheikh said. Davison swallowed hard. If I name him, there will be consequences. He is not someone... Neither am I, the Sheikh said softly. The softness was worse than a threat. Davison's voice fractured. Please, please, I never intended... You intended to profit from deceit, Lena said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She didn't mean to speak. The words surfaced on their own, rising from a place inside her that had gone silent years ago. But now, with the truth exposed and the danger partially contained, she felt something shift, like a hinge unlocking. The Sheikh's gaze softened, not with pity, but with respect edged in curiosity. You have an unusual eye for detail, he said. Most people never learn to see as you do. Lena looked down. It's not talent, just training. What kind of training? Karim asked, wary. She hesitated. Every instinct pleaded for caution. Her past was a wound she didn't display. Her credentials were a story she never told because they only brought trouble. But she wasn't invisible anymore. Not in this room, not in this moment. I was a philology researcher, she said. Classical scripts, paleographic analysis, forensic linguistics. Before, she stopped. Before was too large a word to unpack in front of billionaires and fraudsters. The Sheikh studied her quietly. Before what? Her throat tightened. Before I lost funding, and my visa, and my place, I took the first job I could get to stay afloat. The admission hovered in the room like smoke. Kareem's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The sheikh leaned back, one hand resting thoughtfully on the table. You were not meant to be carrying trays in a hotel. Lena gave a small, controlled smile. I wasn't meant to be here tonight either. Davison, shaking, suddenly lunged toward the table as if to grab the contract, perhaps in some impulsive attempt to salvage something. Kareem intercepted him effortlessly, forcing him back into the chair. The sheikh didn't even look up. You have already lost, he murmured. Davison sagged, defeated. Lena exhaled slowly. Some consequences fall on the guilty, some fall on the silent, and some fall on those brave enough to break the silence. Accountability takes shape. The collapse had already happened. What remained now was the settling, pieces of truth falling into the positions they were always meant to occupy. Davison no longer resembled a broker, or an expert, or even a threat. He looked like a man stripped of pretense, caught between the enormity of his choices and the narrowing corridor of their consequences. The sheikh rose from his chair, not abruptly, not with theatrics, but with the slow, deliberate gravity of someone who had chosen clarity over anger. Kareem, he said, notify the hotel's security, discreetly, no spectacle. His tone carried the weight of inevitability, a verdict dressed in silk. Davison shook his head frantically. Please, if you contact anyone, I'm finished. You finished yourself, the sheikh replied. Kareem stepped out to make the call, his movements crisp, controlled. The suite's door whispered shut behind him. For a moment, only Lena and the sheikh remained facing Davison. The manuscript case sat on the table between them, a quiet monument to the danger narrowly avoided. Davison leaned forward, voice cracking. If you turn me in, he will come for me. Your associate? The sheikh asked. Davison nodded, a trembling, helpless motion. He doesn't tolerate failure. He doesn't tolerate exposure. Lena felt a cold ripple down her spine. She recognized that kind of fear, a fear shaped not by money, but by power, misused in shadowed corners. The sheikh's eyes sharpened. You should have considered that before bringing my name into his schemes. I thought, Davison choked, I thought you would sign quickly, that the girl wouldn't. He gestured toward Lena, but no word came. Not waitress, not girl, not staff. He no longer had a vocabulary for what she was. It was the first respect he'd shown her. The sheikh turned slightly, facing Lena now. You changed the outcome of this entire evening. She looked down, not out of fear anymore, but out of old habit, the reflex of someone who has spent years lowering her gaze so others could feel taller. I only said what I saw, she murmured. And no one else saw it, he replied. The quiet sincerity in his voice startled her more than the earlier danger. She met his gaze. There was no condescension there, only understanding and a hint of something she had not felt directed at her in years. Recognition. The suite door opened softly. Kareem returned, giving a short nod. Security is coming, he said. Discreetly, as requested. Davison let out a strangled breath. Please, Your Excellency, I can fix this. I can return the funds from the deposit. There will be no negotiation, the sheikh said. Not with a man who tried to sell me a lie wrapped in scholarship. Lena watched Davison fold, his shoulders collapsing like a structure whose beams had finally snapped. She felt no triumph, only a heavy, quiet empathy. The powerful fall loudly, the desperate fall silently. The offer that changes everything. 2 hotel security officers arrived with discreet efficiency, no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. They simply entered, exchanged a quiet nod with Karim, and positioned themselves behind Davison. The fraudster didn't protest. The fight had left him long before they touched his shoulder. As they escorted him out, Davison's eyes flicked toward Lena, bewildered, fearful, maybe even pleading. She didn't look away, though she wished she could. His downfall wasn't something she wanted. It was merely the natural end of a truth left unspoken for too long. The suite door closed. Silence settled again, softer now, but full of unfinished meaning. The sheikh returned to the table and rested a hand on the sealed portfolio. He traced its edge with a contemplative slowness, absorbing the weight of the near catastrophe. Then he looked at her. Not the way he looked at staff. Not the way he looked at fraudsters. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time through the correct lens. "What is your full name?" he asked. Lena hesitated. She hadn't spoken her full name in years, not because it was a secret, but because life had pushed her into roles where names didn't matter. Aprons, shifts, anonymity, those things erased the need for identity. "Lena Haddad," she said quietly. He repeated it once, softly, as if testing the shape of it. "Lena Haddad." Karim approached her too, more cautiously this time. "You said earlier you were a researcher." "I was," she replied, "before everything fell apart." "How did it fall apart?" the sheikh asked, not out of curiosity, but with the gravity of someone assessing cause and effect. Lena took a breath. "I challenged an authentication. A powerful academic disagreed. Funding disappeared. Visa options collapsed. And I ended up here." Karim exhaled sharply, almost in disbelief. The sheikh's jaw tightened. "Your insight tonight saved me $240 million, he said. "And possibly my reputation." Lena lowered her eyes. "I did what anyone trained in manuscripts would have done." "No," he said gently. "You did what only someone with integrity would have done." She froze. Then the sheikh stepped closer, not intrusively, but with deliberate respect. "I lead a cultural forensic institute, small, private. Every acquisition we consider must survive far more scrutiny than what happened tonight. People with your skill are rare." Karim added, "People with your courage are rarer." Lena felt something shift inside her, something old and buried, something she had taught herself not to want. Hope, the dangerous kind. The sheikh continued, "I want you on my team, permanently, not as staff, as an analyst." The word struck her like a bell. Analyst, a title she thought she'd lost forever. She blinked, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. "Are you certain?" The sheikh smiled. Small, solemn, certain. "Tonight proved your worth more clearly than any resume. If you accept, we will restore what was taken from you." Lena felt her breath catch. Sometimes the smallest rooms contain the turning points that rewrite a life. 1 year later plus outro. 1 year later, Lena walked through the glass corridor of the Sheikh's Cultural Forensic Institute with a confidence she once believed impossible. Her ID badge, Analyst, Manuscript Forensics Division, swung lightly against her blazer. No apron, no invisibility, no fear of being asked to leave a room she was meant to lead. Her days were filled with ink under microscopes, marginalia debates, spectral imaging sessions. The work she had once done in silence, and secret now done openly, respected, necessary. Her salary paid her debts. Her visa was secure. Her voice no longer trembled when she corrected senior scholars. Some now asked for her guidance. She still kept the small silver pendant beneath her collar. It no longer felt like a reminder of loss. It felt like a promise finally kept. Occasionally, she thought of the night in the private suite, the forged manuscript, the trembling pen, the moment she stepped forward when everything in her begged her not to. she still wasn't sure what had pushed her past fear. Maybe precision, maybe responsibility, maybe the quiet insistence that truth deserves a witness. On her desk, framed behind glass, sat a note from the sheikh. "You saw what none of us could see. Sometimes a single moment refuses to let you stay small."